friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and I'm here today to do a side-by-side comparison between the Playing Marseille, created by Ryan Edward on the left, and the Rare Triumphs, created by Ian Cumpstey on the right. Now, the reason that I'm doing a side-by-side of these two particular decks is because they both sort of adhere to the same idea of a playing card deck that could be played as regular cards if you remove the 22 Trump or Triumph cards, and use the base of 52 cards with the suits that we're familiar with seeing. Or if you include the Triumph cards, you know, it's a fully functioning tarot deck. Now, the Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward comes with a book, and the book explains his orientation. You know, he discusses the suits, you know, the red suits being, you know, the warmer months, and the black suits being the cooler months, which may be something that comes from like a hedge witchery type of tradition of, you know, using playing cards for cartomantic purposes. And I failed to mention too that you could use these decks also as regular, you know, tools for, you know, interpreting regular playing cards. So that you could use these cards for 3 different purposes. 4, if you consider that you could use them for card playing, you know, card playing and cartomantic purposes for both tarot and regular playing cards. Now, the Rare Triumph deck doesn't really come with a booklet. It does come with a white pamphlet, which gives a description of the 22 Triumphs only, because he does take liberties with titles. And, you know, especially if you're not as familiar with tarot, or if you want to get an idea of what his perspective is when he renames certain cards, that could be helpful. Also, he doesn't, Ian Cumpstey does not designate, you know, which cards or which suits portray what seasons of the year or what elements. And so it's kind of helpful in that way, if you're coming from a place of tarot, to just designate the suits the way you would like. Whereas with, you know, the Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward, he's more deliberate about specifying, you know, what the suits suggest. Now, the Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward contains 78 cards. There are no additional or optional cards. In the Rare Triumphs cards, we do have a few additional cards. Now, one of them is an expression. This gentleman did create the Pike and Clover deck, so this might be something that he includes with his decks. And there are a few cards that look like they could be alternate cards, but they're not numbered. You know, this one looks like it could be an alternate for the Bachelor, or more commonly known as the Magician. This one looks like it might be an option for Judgment. And this one looks like it might be an option for the Lover. However, as I mentioned, they're not numbered, and there's no explanation with the deck to know what they could be used for. And I presume it's up to you, right? But I've chosen to use this card, the Wanderer, as the you know, as the Fool card. And the other cards that I mentioned do have numbers, and I'm choosing to use the cards that he designated for those. And you'll see when I get to them. I'm beginning with the Fool, not because I think of the Fool as 0 or 22. I think of the Fool as being outside of the deck. However, you've got to put it somewhere, and so I usually always put it in the beginning. So for each deck, here is the Fool. or the wanderer, as the case may be. The bachelor and the worker. The female pope and the teacher. The teacher being associated with knowledge, as is the female pope. The empress and the merchant. Now, I don't sit very well with the merchant representing the empress. I do appreciate that the traditional tarot has a woman of power as the empress. And what is said about the merchant is, in the pamphlet, is beyond the need to work, sport and pastimes are diverting, carefree, and easy. I'm sorry, I was kind of slow in reading that. I neglected to bring my glasses up. So there's nothing empressy about it. So that requires a bit of a workaround for me. The emperor has the nobleman on the Rare Triumph card, whereas Playing Marseille is much more traditional. In fact, the Playing Marseille is traditional up until we get to the pips. The male pope and the president. The lover card and love. In the Rare Triumph card, it's just the couple. Maybe she's pregnant. And whereas with the Playing Marseille, it's much more traditional, depicting a choice between two women, or two types of women, or maybe a mother and a lover, whatever the case may be as it's depicted on the card. Victory versus chariot. Victory is a good keyword. Personally, I prefer the traditional names because I am old school. But I do not mind when, somebody does a new slant on a deck. I'm open-minded enough to consider it. And sometimes you can work around it if they seem, similar enough. You notice here that Justice is blindfolded. I do like that what Cumpstey's done with the Hermit is presented him with a hourglass. I like that. I like hourglasses in tarot decks. And the name Time is an aspect of the Hermit, which certainly is true. Fortune's Wheel, or the Wheel of Fortune of each. Lady Fortuna is represented more than the wheel, which is just a small representation here. Fortitude and strength. This is a nod to the old Italian decks, which I kind of dig. The Hanged versus Downfall. Certainly an old aspect of the Hanged is paying for, the consequence of behavior, paying for behavior, right? Now, I'm not exactly sure why riding backwards on a donkey represents one's downfall, but there must be something about it, and I'll have to look into it. but that is the way he's chosen to represent that aspect of the Hanged Man. Death on a white horse. And traditionally, the death card is a card with a number and no name, and both of these decks honor that tradition. They both have scythes. And the Rare Triumphs card chose to use the word temperance for the number 14 card, which is traditional. The devil becomes chaos. And the explanation for chaos, at the darkest moment, in a state of complete disorder, things cannot be worse. That is the explanation on the weight sheet. Again, a nod to the earlier tarot decks. This reminds me of the V with the, and all the other Italian decks where lightning was a feature, lightning in a tree. You know, destruction from the sky, divine intervention. We have the star. Again, a reference to astrologers. Here we have 7 stars. And here we have 8. The moon. Again, more of a nod to the earlier decks with an astronomer or astrologer. Astrologers were astronomers in those days, those early days. And the more traditional moon of the Marseille and Italian decks. Yeah, definitely a nod to the V. Okay, we have the sun, and a more traditional sun that we're used to. And fame, number 20, versus judgment. And fame is not a bad keyword for judgment. Certainly it's an aspect of judgment, but it limits the interpretation, whereas judgment, I think, is a little bit more fluid. And for the final trump card, triumph card, we have the world or eternity. And I kind of like eternity for this card. I also, of all the cards in the deck, I know it's like one of the best cards to pull and to see in a spread, the world card, but I think it's like the ugliest. You know, I never really like the world card of any deck, but I really like the world card of this deck. And so I appreciate the thought that went into creating that card. Okay, now we're on to the pips. And remember that Ryan Edward described the red cards as going from spring and summer, and the black cards going from autumn to winter. And so I just put it in that order for convenience. So we have the ace of coins, or diamonds. Look how beautiful. I really like that. And I apologize, I'm going through them kind of slowly because I'm steadying the tripod with one hand, and I can only use one hand to do the reveal of each card. So the Playing Marseille deck on the left seems to be a little more traditional as far as regular playing cards go, but I really like the richness of the playing card aspect of the Rare Triumph cards. Like, I really like these diamonds a lot. And perhaps I have this upside down. The cardstock of each is quite different. This isn't quite matte. It's got a little bit of a sheen, but not unbearable. And the backs, by the way, are really beautiful. I really like the backs of the Playing Marseille. There is a thin white border. The cardstock of the Rare Triumphs is really beautiful. It's a satin finish, which gives it a pretty matte. You don't see any glare on this. And the backs are gorgeous. Oop, my apologies for that. We have the page or valets, and they're known as jacks on the Rare Triumph cards. The knights. The queens. And the kings from the suit of diamonds. I think of them as coins, so if my mouth says coins, forgive me. Okay. Now the Ace of Hearts in the Playing Marseille clearly shows an association with the suit of cups, whereas in the Rare Triumphs there is no such association. In fact, it's a pierced heart, which is curious. Kind of has a love hurts kind of feel, right? You know, despite what anyone might think of the Rare Triumphs trump cards, you know, being irregular or being unusual, their pips are just beautiful, really beautiful pips. And you've been noticing, I'm sure, that in the Playing Marseille there are no numbers on the pip cards, whereas in the Rare Triumph cards, the cards are numbered in the corners, which makes it easier when you're trying to put them in order, or I'm sure if you're playing, you know, playing a game. And we get to the courts of the suit of cups of each. Again, a jack. Kind of looks like a fool, no? With the little animal. The knight. Again, a pierced heart, as we noticed in the ace. The Queen of Hearts of each. And the King of Hearts, kind of like the Suicide King that we're accustomed to seeing with regular playing cards. We have a bit of that here and here, although it doesn't seem like he's really stabbing his head in this one. Behind it, more of a raised sword. Onto the suit of clover or clubs. And again, a reference to the more traditional suit of batons that we're familiar with in tarot. And there's no association here. So I believe you would be able more freely to make whatever association you want with the pip cards using the Rare Triumphs. Whereas with the Playing Marseille, there is more of a direct suggestion of what suits are represented by the pips. And they just so happen to match mine. So, I'm comfortable with the Playing Marseille. And since I can make whatever associations I want with the Rare Triumphs, I'm comfortable with that too. And I do like how 5s and 10s are marked with the Roman numerals on the Playing Marseille. The cards of the Playing Marseille are a little taller, a little thicker stock, because the cards, seem to be a little higher in this one, in this deck. Overall, in a pile. Okay, back to our jacks and our valets or pages. Oops, my bad. I screwed up here. My apologies. Here are the knights. The queens. And the kings. I'm sorry about that. I do notice that the Rare Triumphs cards are a little slippery, so they fall out of, when they're stacked, they kind of fall easily. And now we are with the aces of the final suit. The suit of swords and spades. And again, with the Playing Marseille, we have a clear association of spade with sword. Whereas in this one, I guess too, it's kind of like a arrow. So you see these decks are very versatile. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you could use them for interpretation as, you know, a regular deck of playing cards, just remove the Triumph cards or the Trump cards, or a fully functioning tarot deck. And you can play a game of tarot, which is a game still played, of course, or a regular, you know, 52 card game, you know. So it's very versatile. In fact, I guess 2 years ago, I thought it would be a great idea to do a deck that could be used in that way. And I began in earnest creating a tarot deck using the more familiar suits as the pip. And I was so excited about it until I saw that somebody had already done it. Until someone brought to my attention that this deck existed. And I was like, I just abandoned the project because, you know, it wasn't anything new. And so I put it aside. But I have, you know, I guess about a dozen cards that I started. But, you know, if somebody else already came up with the idea, and, you know, I just felt like I wasn't contributing anything new by doing it. So I abandoned the idea. Again, the X for 10. And now we're into our final quartz for the suits of spades or swords. And I hope you've enjoyed this side-by-side comparison. You know, maybe if you're in the market for one deck of this sort, maybe this video will help you decide which one of these decks you might prefer to have. I'll show you a side-by-side of how deep they are. And you'll see that you see the difference in their width. Maybe you'll see it better if I do this. Sorry. I can't do it. I can't do it because I only have one free hand. Maybe you can see it this way. Or not. Well, I guess there's not that much of big of a difference because you really can't tell. But at any rate, I hope this has been helpful to you. And until next time, friends, stay well and peace.